Typhoon Regassa battering the coast of southern China and the Hong Kong area. So, former Super Typhoon Regassa slowly losing strength, but still a powerful, ferocious Category 4 storm and perilously close to the Hong Kong-Macau region at 21.3 north, 113.9 degrees east. The good news is it is moving due west at this point, which means that a direct hit will just about be spared, with the inner eye wall remaining offshore for those conurbations. However, it will continue westerly and make landfall possibly, or at least directly impact other areas of the coastline of China, Guangdong province, along that south coast in the next 12 hours as we tick down to landfall. Well, we're still giving it winds of 140 miles per hour and a pressure estimate of 933 millibars right now. Latest as of 6 a.m. Hong Kong time this September 24th. The storm does look like it will start a more quick weakening trend fairly soon, at just 73 kilometers from Wanshan, 101 from Macau, 106 from Hong Kong, which is under a signal 10 wind warning, signal 9 for Macau, 206 kilometers from Guangzhou, and 224 from Yangjiang. Not sure whether the warnings in China are still the same there, but last indications that we got was that it was still orange typhoon warnings. However, it would not surprise me if they did go to red at some point. I just don't have that info in front of me here. But damaging winds expected, of course, across that whole region, where winds of over 200 kilometers per hour are still possible along the coast of China, wherever Regassa makes its closest approach or potential landfall. Certainly would have, if that northern inner eye wall hits land, you'll be getting exposed to winds like that. Typhoon conditions remain possible in Hong Kong and Macau this morning as the storm passes to the south, moving westerly. With a large northern wind field, however, strong winds will be felt over a very large area. The wind field will be gradually shrinking though. Once it moves through the Leizhou Peninsula tomorrow, it should substantially weaken and may barely be a tropical cyclone by the time it reaches Vietnam towards the end of the week. However, for that nation, there is a bigger concern brewing further south in the form of newly formed tropical storm Buoloi, which we'll also be providing updates on. But certainly this storm Regassa will be dissipated very quickly by the time it gets into the Indochina region. We were originally going to give it 145 miles per hour for this update, but latest satellite image frames have brought it down just a tad to 140, so that graphic's a bit out of date at the bottom. All the other agencies hovering around the 130 mark right now, including the ADT satellite estimates. The storm, the eye temperature up to about 1 Celsius at this point, down to 1 Celsius I should say, which is one indicator, and of course the inner eye wall is starting to really shrivel up on that northern side. There's Pegasus forecast cone there. Of course it's well out of their AOR now, but they're expecting it to maintain typhoon status until it passes possibly into Vietnam. DTWC forecast cone there as well has typhoon status also, just about down tropical storm status as it enters Vietnam. 60 knots there they have. Well, this is the GFS forecast showing what happens to Regassa, but also what happens to Buoloi behind it, this next system, a large system, and increasingly calling for intensification before it reaches the Philippines, so we could now be looking at a strong tropical storm or maybe even a Category 1 typhoon landfall. But here's a close-up of Regassa losing those winds very, very quickly, but obviously the very poor conditions are going to be in the very near future here whilst the storm remains strong. And there's that next system, which of course is now a tropical storm Buoloi, possibly becoming a major typhoon Category 3 as well there, as it just about passes southwest of Hainan. So the rainfall associated with Regassa will really deplete quite quickly after it makes that landfall. Some monsoonal showers in between, and then potentially Typhoon Regassa moving inland over Vietnam much later on in that forecast period. But certainly the rainfall from this storm is going to be a short-lived affair. It's moving obviously due west, so by the time we get through the next 12 hours, the Hong Kong, Guangzhou region will be lightening up on the rain showers. However, taking a look at total rainfall expectations, this will be on top of what's already fallen so far from the storm, and of course taking a look at the next one. But you can see in total there a few areas to the west of Macau getting up towards 200 millimeters of rainfall. For the Hong Kong area, it's probably going to be around 100 to 150 millimeters of extra rainfall on top of what we've already had. And for parts of Vietnam there, from the next storm primarily, we're looking at potentially 18 inches of rainfall, which is quite a lot, 450 millimeters. And for the Philippines, quite a lot of extra rainfall there as well, of course, after Regassa, particularly in western Luzon, could be a significant issue. While sea surface temperatures for both storms are still looking good, 29 degrees Celsius or higher for both systems there. Regassa, of course, is not going to benefit very much more from those sea surface temperatures now that land interaction is becoming a bigger and bigger thing, and there is also moderate wind shear in the area, which could also be playing a part. The storm structure, with its inner eyewall and potentially an outer eyewall, has allowed it a little bit more time to remain strong, but it is finally starting to show signs of real capitulation in these latest frames. Looking at this satellite imagery, you can see a bigger and bigger slot, potentially of dry air there, but certainly of nothing in between those two bands. The eye itself is shrinking and looks like it may well disappear in the next few hours. Looking at this, the eye temperature has steadily decreased, which is a sign of weakening, but certainly looking at the storm structure in general, it is a very picturesque looking typhoon, really throwing out massive bands on that northern side, which is a concern to me, because I imagine there's a lot of precipitation in all of that right now, and I do wonder whether the models have seen that enough, because GFS has consistently been quite low on those rainfall totals, but when you look at that big band, probably producing extremely heavy rainfall at times, and could be for an extended period. Storm's movement looks pretty clearly towards the west in those latest frames, and that is likely to continue with maybe a very slight northward element. But the main eye wall will be missing most of those populated areas. Macau will probably be getting the worst of the conditions out of all of those cities in the area, and then moving on towards Yanjiang a little bit later on. There's a wide shot of the radar, and here's a close-up from Hong Kong showing that double eye wall feature there. Really impressive actually, but that outer one very chunky, showing some significant patches of red there moving into the Hong Kong area, really getting large amounts of rainfall right now. Look at the wide shot and you can see those two storms that are currently active, and in the Western Pacific as a whole there are actually three. Neoguri barely holding on to typhoon status out at sea, but now we have Tropical Storm Regassa, which will be heading towards the Philippines, and that of course is going to be causing issues as well, already starting to take shape there. You can see on that satellite imagery. Wide shot there for Regassa as well, looking decent. Nada is now a hurricane in the Eastern Pacific, a Category 1. Gabrielle holding on to Category 4 status, heading for the Azores, and the next system in the Atlantic is now at 60% on our estimates. Regassa along the coast of China, Gualoi as a tropical storm, and Neoguri as a typhoon with an increasingly odd track.